Hello, everyone, and welcome to Soul and Story. I am Cindy Smith, and I am a very new author. I am writing my first novel. I'm very close to being finished with it, and I am very excited and ready to um, write my next project. It's hard when you get close to the end. You want to start the next one really quick, but I am learning patience, and so I'm excited to be here with you this morning.
Hello, I'm Sara R. Turnquist. I'm clean historical romance author of over 24 books. I think it's 25, 26 now. I lose count. And I'm a speaker. And Cindy is messing with her microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It was
It
just
fell
like,
over. It fell over. I'm not at my normal
uh,
spot today.
it's okay. It's okay. But today we're going to be talking about different types of grief. As some of you may know, especially those of you that live here in Middle Tennessee, we've had so many families displaced by the floods or fires or whatever. I'm sure you know someone who has been displaced from and or lost their home too at some point. And I think when we consider grief, it's usually in the context of someone dying. And that's a primary situation in which we experience grief, but it's not the only situation in which we experience grief. People also go through a mourning period when anything creates a drastic change in your life and puts a stop to old normal and starts a new normal, a separation from what was.
Absolutely. And I think too, like, you can grieve the loss of a dream or as an
Mhm.
adult, I've gone through a lot of counseling, and I have grieved over things that happened in my past that I really had no control over, but that impacted me in a significant way. I think that it's possible to grieve. Um, it's possible to grieve even once you have a child and things go to a new, like,
Mm,
grieving that alone time with your spouse, or when you add children, have a little bit of grief over not being able to just have that close one-on-one time with your first child, or
mhm.
what is interesting is you can have joy and you can have grief at
Mm.
the same time.
Yeah. When I think about this type of grief, I think about friendships ending, relationships, romantic relationships ending, pets dying, moving to a new place. And as you're saying, even the introduction of a new family member, especially your first child, because that's a drastic change. There's the loss of the life that was, the what I'm used to, right? That
Absolutely.
childless state, for example. And not that bringing a child into the world doesn't have joy, but it is okay to acknowledge that there is the loss of something at the same time, the loss of the ability to just pick up and go to the movies or go out to
Exactly.
dinner or town or whatever, right?
Right. Right. Absolutely. um I know that when Sean and I moved, right after we got married, we lived close to my family for 3 months, and then we moved from Texas to Illinois, and I remember sitting in our new apartment that first night,
Mm,
not knowing anybody, not being close to my family, and while I was, again, it's that joy and grief at the same time. I was excited about this new adventure I was gonna be having with Sean, but I was
mhm.
also grieving that my parents weren't just down the road, and I
Yeah.
wasn't gonna see them, as often. And I love the movie Inside Out, and I loved how it
Mm,
explained how you could have 2 even sometimes 3 emotions with those, the clear balls, and, when it was, happy, it was yellow, and when it was sad, it was blue, but then she could have one that was swirling yellow and blue,
mm,
and, I think that was one of the first times I experienced having grief and another emotion. Um,
mm.
I I wouldn't want my life any other way, but, moving away from my family the first time was hard.
Yeah. My son, my youngest, has been experiencing that nostalgia, that feeling of nostalgia of remembering something that was a sweet memory, and it creates that sadness that it doesn't exist anymore that way. but a joy that it did
Yeah.
happen, that he had that friendship. And he calls it nostalgia. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was like, it's nostalgia. And he was like, well, anyways, with my nostalgia. And I was like, fine,
Well, the way
it's
it's
fine.
spelled, that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And so having conversations with him about that, and the first time I experienced deep grief was the loss of a pet.
Mm,
When I was middle school age, it was horrible. This was a pet that we'd had for many, many years. It was a miniature poodle. Her name was Abby.
mm,
And she had been my companion and comfort for many, many years.
mm.
And so I thought I knew what grief was until my first grandparent passed. But the most intense grief was when my mother passed. And walking through that with my counselor, she explained to me that there is a difference between grieving a loss and having a spirit of grief. That
Mm,
first one is very healthy, and the latter one becomes something else entirely, that probably requires some sort of therapy or whatnot to help move through that grief.
yeah. When you were talking just now, it made me think of the book of Ruth and when Naomi,
Mm,
she lost her husband and then she lost her sons. And when she went back when
Moab.
she went back to Moab, thank you, when she went back to Israel, she's like, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara because it means bitterness. And she definitely had a spirit of grief. She was wearing
Hmm.
it. And I think
Yeah,
that is dangerous. I mean, she didn't have counseling back then. God, obviously, through reading
right.
the book of Ruth, he restored so much to her that she was
Mm,
able to go back to being Naomi. Though I find it interesting, she calls herself Mara, but when you're reading the book of Naomi or Ruth, Naomi is always referred to as Naomi. People talk to her about
mm,
about her as Naomi. She is the only one calling herself Mara or Mira, whatever
mm.
whatever bitterness. And
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it is something that we need to be very careful of, not letting that grief as the emotion become our identity, become something that we wear.
Yes, and I think you're making a very good point there about the way we wear things. And I think some counselors and coaches call it an identity box, that you take this identity box and you live in it and it becomes part of who you are, even though it may not be core to who you are. It's something that you've taken on,
Yeah.
not necessarily something that God created, how He created you to be, but it's something you've pulled in and taken hold of so tightly, like Naomi with that spirit of grieving or that spirit of bitterness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I so relate to in the I'm gonna go back to the movie Inside Out because I just love that movie and I cry
Mm,
every time I watch it. But
mm,
I so relate to Joy. Like, I feel like I'm Joy. I mean, one time I told someone I'm just gonna dye my hair blue and wear yellow all the time because
mhm,
so relate to her. And so grieving and sadness is hard for me. Um,
mm.
and it's hard for me to let myself grieve. It's
Yeah.
the really first time I ever had really hard grief was in 1984 when my mom's dad died. I was very close to
Mm,
him, to my grandfather, and we were fishing buddies. I was his coffee
mm,
drinking buddy. He would make me what's called coffee milk, where he put a lot of sugar, a little bit of coffee, and a
mm,
whole lot of milk. And I think I might have shared this before, but we would have our coffee, have saltine crackers with peanut butter, and watch Hogan's Heroes on the black and white TV in their kitchen. And
mm.
so when he died, that feeling of like I'm never going to see him again this side of heaven. And
Yeah.
I was young. I was 14 and I'm thinking it's going to be like a really long time until I get to see him
Mm.
again. And my parents always wanted me to
Are
be
you still there,
happy.
Cindy? Did I
Yeah, can you
lose
not hear
you?
me? No, I'm
I
here.
think
Can
I
you hear
lost
me?
her. But I agree that that feeling of grief, is uncomfortable, that sadness, and we tend to avoid negative emotions But here, let me see if I can switch this around so you're able to see me bigger. It's
Can
not
you hear me?
working. Maybe I'm the one that's gone. Hmm,
I don't know. Can you hear
I
me,
don't know.
Sarah?
Somebody drop something in the comments and let us know, is Cindy gone or am I gone? At any rate, I agree that sitting in that sadness is a hard thing. Um, I think that what I've learned about the grieving process has been eye opening, especially after my mother passed. I've learned that grieving is different for everyone, and that the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, are common to the human experience of grief, but not always in that order, or that you hit each one. You may hit stages of grief multiple times. You may hit depression and then go to denial and then go back.
Oh my goodness. I think we're having some technical difficulties today because I lost Sarah. I'm not sure what happened, but yeah, grief is hard, and I think um, even in friendships, when friendships die, when friendships um, end up being taken away for some reason, moving or just growing apart or having a disagreement. Sometimes when we have disagreements with our friends, that can end a friendship, and it can be grief. It can be a time of grief. I am going to give Sarah. I've lost her completely. So I'm going to give her a couple minutes to come back, but I want to talk. Hold on just a second. She's asking if she got lost. She can't get it. She's going to keep trying to get into into StreamYard again, but I will just talk about how, as we are grieving, I want to encourage you to not think of having a checklist that you have to move through grief in a certain um, um, hold on just one second, y'all. I'm sorry. Let me text. Um, oh, is she coming back? Is she back? Is she back? Sarah, can you see me?
Hey, I can. Can you see
Okay,
me?
good. Yes. Yeah.
Did you lose me? Did I lose you?
You got kicked out and you were gone, and I think I was still on.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Well, I will let you pick up where you left off then.
okay. I was going to tell you where I was. I was just talking about how when we go through grief, we can't have a checklist. We can't say, okay, I have to go through the grief in this amount of time. I have to do these amount of steps to get through
Mhm.
grief. It is something that is organic, it is fluid, it's something that just we have to let it do what it wants, and that
Mhm.
grief can surprise us. We think we might be over it and something comes back and just surprises us.
Yeah, I was saying, I don't know if anybody heard me or if I was kicked out already, but the grieving process is, as you're saying, Cindy, it's different for everybody. We have, or many of us have probably heard that the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, that while they are common to the human experience of grief, they don't necessarily come in that order. And you can hit multiple times, like you could go from bargaining to depression, then back to bargaining. And you may not hit every single one of those stages. It's
Mhm.
just so individual, our experience of grief.
Yeah, and don't you find it interesting to you, like last Father's Day, um, on my side of the family, not Sean. Sean has a rather large family, but on my side, it's really small. I was an only
Mm,
child. My aunt, my mom's sister, only had two kids. One of my cousins is gone. Both of my parents are gone, and so I was
mm,
going somewhere by myself on Father's Day, and I just got hit by how my dad's gone. I didn't get to wish him a happy
mhm,
Father's Day, and how
mm,
small my family has gotten. And I was grieving all of the people that we'd lost. And you know, my my grandfather died in 1984. My grandmother died in
Mm.
1998. So it's something that I'm like, oh, I should be over this, but it just hit me again, and I
Mm.
missed them. I missed that that knowledge that you can share with a family member, the history, the memories,
Mm.
um, and that I was grieving that that's getting smaller. You know?
Yeah, and I think that grief can be cyclical for a lot of people, and it can hit you like that from nowhere, like you experienced. And it's uncomfortable to sit with that sadness. And we
Yeah,
don't like these more hard or negative, some people call them negative emotions. I think they're just more difficult emotions.
yeah.
And we don't like sitting with them.
Mm-mm.
And when it comes to grieving in general, I love J.R.R. Tolkien's quote from The Lord of the Rings. In The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf says, I will not say, do not weep, for not all tears are evil. There's
Yeah.
great truth and great strength in that. It
Hmm.
is not weakness to mourn, to cry, to rail against the injustice of loss. It's not fair. It's not
Yeah.
right. It is
Mm-mm.
very wrong. And that's why we feel that way, because we were created for fellowship unending. We were
Yeah.
created for something more. But
Absolutely.
sin brought death and loss into our world. But we were not and are not left hopeless. For God provided the remedy for grief
Absolutely.
and for that situation, that separation, in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that quote by Tolkien. Sorry,
Mhm.
J.R.R. I didn't mean to mispronounce your name, but um, I just love that because um, we weren't meant for this. We weren't meant for grief. We
Mm,
weren't meant for loss. And I remember when my mom died in 2021. A friend of mine and I've moved to several different locations this morning because I have someone here who's helping us get our house ready to put on the market, and I left it, but she got me this little bottle. It's a clear bottle, and inside of it was rolled up on a little piece of paper, Psalm 56:8, and it says, "You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book." And
mm,
I just remember how precious, and I actually still keep it out. It's usually in my office on a shelf where I can see it because I'm just amazed at how much my tears mean to God. When we
mm,
cry, he collects them in
mm.
his bottle. Um, Back in the Middle Eastern times, and I cannot, you may be able to pronounce this word for me. That the name, the Greek name for the jars that women used to carry, lamech.
I would say lacrimatories.
Thank you. And it's the
Mhm,
ancient practice of collecting tears, particularly during mourning, MOU, not morning as in early in the day,
mhm,
rituals involving a small vessel known as tear jars, and they would gather tears of mourners. And these vessels were either made of terracotta or glass and were often placed in tombs as a symbol of respect for the
mm,
deceased. This practice was prevalent in the ancient Mid East and in Roman societies. And actually, I just finished a Bible study called Jesus and Women by Christy McClellan, and she has an ancient one that
mhm,
I don't remember. It's old and it's beautiful, and women would carry it and they would catch their tears, but
mhm.
God catches our tears. God catches our
Yes.
tears, and I just think that that's so beautiful.
Mm. I love too, as we're talking about different types of grief, that in that study, Christine McClellan talks about how, like, if a husband went off to war, a woman would collect the tears of missing him in a bottle in a lacrimatory, and then when he came home, she would break the jar at his feet so that he could see her tears. He could see how much she had mourned his loss
Yeah.
in the time that they were separated. And I also think it's interesting. My background is actually in science. I've probably mentioned that here before. Um, I have a biology and chemistry degree, even though I write historical romance. It seems to fit great.
It does.
But one of the things that I learned in my studying is that the protein composition of your tears is different based on why you are shedding those tears. Happy tears have a different protein composition compared to grieving tears, compared to
That's so cool.
hurt tears, compared to angry tears. And I think that is a beautiful thing that God has done, because what is the purpose of that? What's the purpose of that? Nobody is going to say, "Give me your tears so I can see if you're angry or not." Although I think some of our husbands might appreciate that,
Exactly.
knowing why we're crying. But
Right.
nobody's going to do that. And so I think the purpose is to show us that He collects our emotions and our tears the way that way, so that there's, maybe they're separated, maybe they're together, and He can, I don't know, but it's
Mhm.
just an interesting little fact that there's no real good explanation other
Mm-mm.
than God, just God.
Isn't he amazing? Just the intricacies, the things
Hmm.
that we can't see or we don't know. It just is amazing to me. I did not know the thing about the protein. That is
Hmm.
something I'm going to have to think on because that,
Yeah.
like you said, unless we have a microscope and or whatever we can do to need to see what protein is in our tears, we won't know.
Hmm.
I do agree. I
Yeah.
think our husbands would appreciate it, especially with our teenage daughters.
Oh goodness, I would appreciate that too. But I do want to move from grieving to thinking about this weekend. And this is
Mm,
Holy Week. So this weekend we will celebrate Christ's death and resurrection and remember and think on what that means. The aching of grief makes us all the more keenly aware that we are not made for this world, for this life. Even with the good and wonderful things that God has blessed us with in this world, they cannot compare to the hope we have in Christ.
amen.
I believe I believe that God is grieved by our losses as well. I
Mhm.
believe that when my mother passed away, that he grieved alongside my father and my siblings and everyone who loved her. He is with us in the presence of his Holy Spirit, our great comforter.
Yeah.
So I would love for us to just take that moment, take this time this weekend, among the cooking and the Easter eggs and all of the things, take a moment to rest
Mhm.
in that fact that when the
Mhm.
roughness of life knocks us off our feet, He is there, He is present, He is strength, and He is comfort.
Absolutely. And, Hebrews talks about how um, he is able to sympathize with us because
Mm,
we can go boldly before the throne of God because of what Christ did for us on the cross. And he knows grief. He experienced grief.
mm,
The night before he was crucified, he had so much
mm,
grief, he was sweating blood. And I just think it is, we try to think of grief as something that we have to control, but
mm,
he poured out his grief. And I
mm,
thinking about Good Friday, um, our church has just they open up the sanctuary from not sure what time, but it's open for a couple of hours. And when you go in, they give you this guided prayer, some
mm,
scriptures to read, some prayer prompts. They have just some really quiet music. The lights are out, and you can just go in
mm,
there and sit and reflect on what Christ did. And I'm always moved. I mean, I've been to Good Friday services, um, all I can't just tons of time. It's
mm,
interesting. Just a quick little side: when we lived in China, we couldn't meet on Good Friday, and so on Easter Sunday, the first half of the service, we talked about his death on the cross. And then
mm.
halfway through the service, they would say, "He is risen," and the congregation would say, "He is risen
Is
indeed."
risen indeed.
And then the rest of the service would be about his resurrection, which I think was really
Mm.
kind of also interesting to have those to contrast those two.
The
But
juxtaposition, yeah.
absolutely. But I just love
Mhm.
it's like I'm looking for. not looking forward to like, oh, I'm excited, but I'm looking forward to that quiet time on Friday at church when I can
Mm,
just really think about what Christ did for us. And then Sunday morning we can celebrate.
mm. I just love that. I love that openness and that invitation to sit in quiet and think on his sacrifice. And so I'm going to challenge everyone listening to make that a goal for your week, to sit in the quiet with your thoughts directed toward Christ and his
Mm,
sacrifice, but also to what his death and resurrection affords us in him.
amen.
It is truly a challenging thing, as we've mentioned, to sit with your own thoughts and feelings. So I'm going to challenge you to 5 minutes, just sit for 5 minutes, especially those of you that are in a grieving season, either from
Mhm.
a loss of a person or just a loss of what was.
Yeah.
Um, but let me encourage you, especially, to sit and focus on him and the hope that we have in him. But I
Amen.
want to thank everyone for tuning in with us, whether you're here live or after the fact. We appreciate each and every one of you,
Absolutely.
especially hanging in there through our technical difficulties. But let's go ahead and have you drop in the comments about your favorite Easter tradition for your family and for celebrating and remembering this weekend and this week.
Yeah,
We are looking forward to seeing you next week. And Cindy and I talked about it already. I think we're going to talk about something a little more writerly. So
absolutely.
get ready for us because we coming at you next Tuesday.
Yes, we are. And thank you guys. Bye.